In this lesson, we're going to learn how to touch up a procedural terrain using the Terrain Editor brush tools. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a standard procedural terrain. And let's just left click on this and hold or hit OK. It's going to create our procedural terrain here. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention was with procedural terrains, they are going to come in at a default size depending on the terrain option size that you chose with the standard terrain. So right now, if we double click on this, this is set to 256 by 256. So if I hit OK on this, and I want this to be a little bit larger, what I can do is delete that out. And let me go ahead and create a new terrain, and let's set this to 512 by 512. And I'll hit OK on this, and it's going to bring up our terrain editor. Now, right now, you would think that this is a standard terrain. But what I can do is change it from a standard to a procedural this way. So now, if I hit OK, and I go ahead and I render this out, we have this procedural detail in here. Let me go ahead and zoom out. Okay, you see that we have that detail in there. And we'll hit OK. Let's take a look at this procedural terrain in action right in here. Okay, so you can see that that detail is there depending on that. Now, the max resolution that we'll have on this terrain is going to be 512 by 512. So if you want that to be larger, you need to go ahead and create a new terrain and set that to 2048 by 2048. Okay. Now let's switch this over to procedural. Give that just a moment to update. And once that's set to procedural, we can come in here, hit OK. And we'll do a quick render on this. We can see that we have a very high level of detail here. And let's go ahead and grab this and scale it up. So we'll grab our scale tool. Let's switch to our global direction. Scale that in the Z direction there. Just kind of offset that. And we'll use our quick render just to take a look at that detail so far. And we're doing pretty well. Alright. So now what we want to do is work on touching up our procedural terrains. Now, we've just talked about how we can scale terrain and how we can change its resolution for the procedural terrain. But now, what we want to do is do some modifications to its overall shape. Now, right now, I've just scaled this, and it's very jagged at some points, and I want to kind of settle this down. I want to kind of drop some of these elevations down a little bit. And we could go ahead and recreate this elevation using our function editor, but I want to go about it by using the brushes, kind of a more hands-on sort of way. So let's double click on our procedural material, or procedural terrain, and let's start to work with it inside of our terrain editor. So let's work with the raise brush here, and I'm going to turn on my brush editor and turn off that mask. I don't want that mask in there right now. Let's adjust our size, and I'm going to begin lowering some of this terrain, okay, and start to even some of it out. So I'm going to turn my flow down because I really don't want it to have that much of an effect just yet. Let's go ahead and start to click on this and just drop down some of that elevation. Now, whenever we are working with procedural material or procedural terrains, excuse me, I'm having a hard time saying that. When we're working with procedural terrains, we want to do kind of a touch-up sort of workflow here. We don't want to make any major changes just yet. Okay, so if we want to lower parts of this terrain, we'll come around and we'll just touch this up. No major changes or anything like that. Nothing of very high detail. We can come in and we can start to smooth some of this out. And get in, we'll lower this again. Now let's turn off that mask one more time. And let's continue to work with this. Okay. Now, if there are areas that we want to lift up, we're going to use the same type of workflow. Let's take our size down so that we can get a little bit more control. And let's start to raise some of these areas. Okay. Now we can start to just touch this up and get the exact mountain shape that we're looking for. We're trying to get rid of some of those pits and that sort of thing. And this is the process. If we cannot use the function editor and we just need to do a little bit of touch up on the shape, this is okay. But trying to create an overall mountain shape is going to be really, really hard to do that. So we want to make sure that we're keeping up with that. Right. Now, if this is becoming too much, most of this elevation, this jagged elevation, is coming from the scaling that we did of the terrain itself. What we could do is come in here and we can reset all of our 2D sculpting here, and that's going to make that completely flat. Let's go ahead and apply a mountain object to this, and it's going to recreate that for us. Now right now, zero edges is turned on. Let's turn that off there. And this is going to go out just to the certain edge here. Let me turn that back off because I kind of like that other shape a little bit better. Now we have this procedural terrain set to 2048 by 2048. And let's say that I like this shape, but I want to make just a couple of changes here and there. Let's say that I want this mountain to be a little bit larger. So let's pan over here and let's grab our size and let's take this up. And let's just gradually adjust the altitude in this one point. Now if you start adjusting too much, you're going to lose some of that detail. And that's something that we really don't want to do. Okay. Now this is the touch-up process. Okay. This is more of the hands-on. Now this seems to be working really, really well, but I know that in some of my projects, I know that I get a little anxious with some of the details, and I really want to pull those out and work with those, but sometimes I end up destroying the terrain. So again, just be very, very careful with this. And as you can see here, as I begin to pull more and more, that some of that detail begins to bunch together and begins to dissipate. Okay. So I can't really pull up too much in some of these areas, because then that detail is just going to be gone. So I've done a lot of touch-up up to this point, and it's done fairly well, and I'm going to give most of the credit to the resolution that we brought this in as. If we had this set to 256 by 256, I would think that we would have a problem, but it's doing fairly well. So let's hit OK and bring that into our scene. Okay, we're kind of creating something that looks kind of like a quarry. Let's do a quick render on this. And let's hit OK or cancel there. I'm going to orbit around this object here. And let's come right down into here. And let's create a sea object. And then we're going to grab our move tool and just drag this up. And we're going to create something that looks kind of like a lake or something. Alright, let's do a quick render of this. It looks like we're underneath the water there, so let's come up, push ourselves a little bit forward there. And there we go. So we've got our terrain. We've got kind of like this quarry channel or a lake inside of a mountain area. So you can see how we can begin to touch up those procedural terrains, and it has to be done very, very carefully. Again, no major abrupt changes, just change the overall altitude. Make sure you're doing it a little bit by little bit. Don't make any major changes at first. Now in the next lesson, I want to show you how to use constraints to begin sculpting at specific altitudes, and we can begin to create things like cliffs and bluffs and things like that. So I'll see you in the next lesson.